Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission for the City of Clawson for Tuesday, April 14th. I'm going to open the meeting at 7:30. Can we please stand for the...
April 24th. Sorry,
April 24th? What did I say?
14th.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
April 24th. Yeah, I'll open the meeting at 7:30. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Here's our quorum. George made it, okay. And may I have roll call, please?
Ms. Fenton? Mr. Jacobson?
Here.
Mr. Jones? Mr. Kucera?
Here.
Mr. McHale?
Here.
Ms. Prouse? Ms. Scripture? Mr. Shepherd?
Here.
Mr. Watson?
Here.
And so we do have a quorum this evening. I'm going to need a motion to approve the regular minute meetings from April 10th.
I'll make a motion to approve the regular Planning Commission meeting minutes from April 10th, 2018.
Support?
I have a motion, support, any changes, corrections?
Two clarifications. On the second page of the minutes, second to last paragraph, both of mine are fairly self-serving, I suppose. Board member Jacobson asked about demographics that will be using the space. I'd like to amend that to ask for clarification about the demographics of the users in the new facility and expectations about existing patients. The second amendment is at the top of the third page of the notes, starting with Board Member Jacobson asked about patient representation and measures of patient care. I'd like to make an amendment to that to say Board Member Jacobson asked about outside assessments of the quality of the care of services provided to patients. Thank you.
Is it?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. So amended?
I have motion, I have support. Roll call, please.
With amendments.
With amendments, yes.
As amended.
As amended.
And I'd support that.
Okay.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Kucera?
Yes.
Mr. McHale?
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yes.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Item agenda number 5 is a show cause hearing regarding 230 to 250 West 14 Mile Road, which is Clawson Corners, for violation of land development standards, sections 34-515.
Mr. Chairperson, this is a relatively simple matter. The owner of the property was required to post a bond for certain developments that were going on as a precondition to a TCO. TCO was issued. Bond was not posted. We're here. Mr. Band is going to make the presentation on behalf of the owner, and I think you've all received a copy probably of his documentation. It's several pages long, but it's his obligation at this time to make the argument on why it's not necessary or why it wasn't done. I will reply in rebuttal to that. I know that Mr. Elliott handed something out to you. I assume it's pertaining to this. I haven't seen it, but I was told by Mr. Michael, that he did receive it today, so that probably is an explanation regarding this in case you have any questions. But you have the information preliminary right now regarding this hearing, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Band.
Good evening, everybody.
Can you go to the microphone, please?
Good evening, everybody. Michael Band on behalf of Clawson Corners. We've been called in before you on a show cause hearing. I wanted to make a record of the statement of facts and the timeline in this manner. Also, it is worth mentioning we received the letter that was sent out through certified mail. This is the first piece of certified mail that's come to my client's registered office, by the way. So everything else has been through email and oral communications. This is the first letter that we've gotten through formal mail.
Why are you, just out of curiosity, why are you making a significant point about that? I'm curious.
Because for notice provisions, It should have been sent, if it was sent certified mail, this letter was sent to the registered office. Any other notices should have been sent also certified mail or to the registered office.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, for clarification, also, I can't really see it from you. Which letter was, I just want to make sure I understand the content of the letter.
I don't know if it was placed in the file or not. This letter indicates that,
What
do you have
date
a?
is
No,
on it?
I just don't know what you were holding up. I'm sorry. I'm
Oh.
just asking what you're holding up. I saw the certificate.
Oh, it's the letter signed by Building Director Jim Albus indicating that we should appear for a show cause.
April 11th?
Does it have a date on it?
The date is April 11, 2018.
Okay.
Yep, we have a copy of that.
So again, I would like to, before I get into anything else, I'd like to state a timeline of our belief on what happens here. On November 15, 2017, Clawson Corners entered into a development agreement. That development agreement is attached as Exhibit F in my response. Okay? That's just for reference. The next meeting that we had on the agenda was November 28th, 2017, when this commission had Fantastic Sam's temporary certificate of occupancy on the agenda. The following meeting that we attended was January 9th, Planning Commission meeting where this council took a look at site plan review, where you guys ordered 6 conditions of site plan review. That is indicated, oh, and by the way, everything on this timeline, I'm backing up by documentary evidence because I've attached the minutes as part of my exhibits. So on Exhibit A talks about for reference, Exhibit A talks about how the Planning Commission ordered a 60-day temporary certificate of occupancy. Exhibit B specifically talks about the conditions in which Clawson Corners was required to, for site plan review. There's 6 conditions on the last page. Okay. And Exhibit C talks about the extension of Fantastic Sam's TCO. That was scheduled for January 23rd, which is, what is that, 13 days later? That's when you guys discussed the extension. Finally, February 5th, the pole sign building permit application was approved by the building director. That is Exhibit D. Okay? So that is the timeline that I have. One of the things that we wanted to make mention was no security at any point prior to January 23rd was ever required. Even though we have been present at the January 9th meeting, it wasn't addressed on when the TCO was originally issued back in November. So that's one of the points that I need to make. Following the TCO, according to the exhibit, which is Exhibit A, talks about a TCO being issued for 60 days by this commission, not for 30 days. I believe that was misrepresented.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So you're saying prior to the 23rd of January, no type of bond or anything was asked of your client, correct?
Exactly.
So what, and again, I haven't had a chance to read it all, so I guess I'm going to ask us to read it together then. On the Tuesday, January 9th, 2018, consideration for extension.
Oh, you're looking at the exhibit?
Pardon me?
You're looking at the
Yep,
exhibit?
exhibit number B, or letter B, because that's not a number, it's an actual letter. I learned that in school.
Exhibit A or B?
B.
B, okay.
What is the submission of cash deposit in the amount of $5,686 with the city of Clawson treasurer? What is that for then? Again, I haven't read it all complete yet, but what were we asking for that for? Do you know?
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Okay, so go to Exhibit B.
Oh, okay.
Go to that next page.
That's not ours. That's the one before you. That's the one, that was another,
That's for 303, that's further down.
yeah,
Yeah, it's 303, that's a different address.
that's not my client.
Okay.
Discount fabric, please.
That's not my client.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the last page indicates the 6 conditions of site plan approval. Nothing
Okay, I see.
in that indicated anything about a bond.
Okay, thanks, that
Okay.
answers my question.
Okay. So at that point, no security had ever been required, even though there had been multiple meetings of this commission. So now that a timeline had been provided, I wanted to provide, on the first page of my, I don't want to call it a motion, my response is that we indicated what the law was, that the Planning Commission had an obligation to issue a bond prior to the issuance of a TCO, not after, okay? On November 28th, when the TCO was issued for Fantastic Sam's, that should have been the time for the bond, not later in time, okay? Sorry, my mouth is a little dry right now. So our first argument is that with respect to the amount of the bonds, you guys have ordered on January 23rd a $10,000 cash bond. We think that's unreasonable and we think it's excessive for the following reasons. When our contractor submitted a estimate, the estimate was only $3,850. That estimate is Exhibit D, okay? That is the estimated cost of construction. That is also a building permit that was approved by the building director, okay? It's worth noting on January 18th, 5 days before the meeting where you guys ordered the $10,000 bond, Mr. Elliott had requested an estimate of the cost for site improvements. The next day, my client indicated we had no estimates at that time. We were still waiting on estimates by our contractors. Nonetheless, at the January 23rd meeting, Mr. Elvis estimated the amount to be $10,000, but he had no basis on that. There was nothing submitted he could have said $100,000, but we find that arbitrary and excessive. And then later, 10 days or 11 days later, Mr. Elvis approved the building permit at $3,850, okay? So the security requested is now unreasonable in light of the building permit being approved at $3,850. Okay. Next argument is if security was requested, we said on November 28, 2017, that is when the bond requirement should have been set, when the TCO was originally issued pursuant to Clawson's laws. Okay. It's got to be issued prior to the issuance of a TCO. In this case, because Fantastic Sam's TCO was issued November 28th, it was issued for a period of 60 days. I've also been, the response that I received from Mr. Elliott indicates that 60 days was, I think he stipulates that 60 days is the amount of time that this commission ordered the TCO.
That's what we originally granted, yes.
Yeah, but in this, he indicates that the building official issued it for 30 days. If you look at the minutes, this commission said shall grant it for 60 days. So I don't know anything about the building official only issuing it for 30 days. So on January 23rd, that TCO was still valid. It hadn't expired yet. So if we were on for an extension, then the bond should have been required back in November.
So can I ask a question, and this is going to be to John. John, is what he's saying accurate? Because obviously I don't know the laws and I don't know the specifics. So, because if that first point that he brought up is valid, that you can't ask for a bond, you have to ask for the bond prior to the TCO, right? If that's what you're stating?
Yes.
Is that true? Is that valid? Because
No, I don't think that is true. It's within the discretion of this body to determine when a bond is appropriate if there's going to be TCO. Now, there are a lot of factors that come into play regarding when that occurs, because you may not have all the information regarding what has to be done before a TCO can be issued, what is specifically going to be done for which a bond can be determined. So there's some flexibility. Now, the argument that Mr. Band is raising is that we should have done this, we should have done that. My argument is, what's the harm? They've never provided any security yet, and we're here on the hearing about the necessity for security. And they're in the occupancy. So if there is a preliminary error in the issue of posting security at some given time, what's the harm, what's the foul?
There's none.
And Mr. Bain, let me ask you a question, sorry, and then I'll let you finish, I
I have a
promise.
couple more arguments, so.
Okay, but let's go to point of time, just because you're arguing some pretty extensive points, and we're not going to remember all those points. So I think that if we're looking at each point as it comes across, we come to a resolution each point and go to the next. Otherwise, I just think you're going to put a lot of information on us. And let's be honest, we do this on a volunteer basis. I don't know these laws intimately. So the first thing you brought up, that first law that you brought up, understanding what John just said, like, we couldn't have set that on that date. And let me just refer to what you're talking about when you put your timelines in here. So give me a second. I'm going to get to that timeline on November 15th. To set that, but not to know what he needed to do, because coming in for a temporary
That was the
certificate of
development
occupation.
agreement.
Pardon me?
That was the development agreement. You mean November 28th, when they had the first hearing?
The first hearing for Santasca Sam's November 28th. When someone's asking for a TCO, they're usually coming to us and saying, there's other work that needs to be done. We'll talk about the other work, but we need to get this open so we can start a business. And we understand that. And then coming to us later on and saying, hey, here's work that needs to be done. We understand that now you're telling us the value of that work. Now we have the information we need to set a bond. We didn't have that information on that meeting at the 28th.
Sure,
So,
but if I may respond.
Go ahead, yep.
On the first page of the response, I've included what the law was. I specifically highlighted, it says prior to the issuance of a TCO. It says shall be required prior to the issuance of a TCO. Shall be. Shall is mandatory, not discretionary. That is the first argument. Second of all, in light of what we've submitted, and the building director has approved a building permit for 3850 for our sign, that in light of that, the bond amount is excessive at $10,000 in light of that.
I mean,
Plus,
that's a point I would agree with.
The issue of trees also had not been resolved. I don't know if you guys remember on this commission, but there was discussion as to how many trees. We also have an email, this wasn't included in the response, but there was a recent email on April 19th. It was from D. Ballard at City of Clawson.
Our DPW head.
Okay. And he indicates that a tree's cost, that last year they had purchased 2.5 caliber trees. The cost was $325 installed. So if that's the case. So we have a $325 estimate pursuant to D. Ballard. He's what's his position?
He's the head of the Clawson DPW.
Okay, head of the Clawson DPW. And also, it further goes on to say, how much do hold on, sorry, I have not reviewed the second part of that. Is it acceptable if my client indicates something? Okay, yes. With the limited space, it indicates on here with the limited space on the right-of-way that only 2 trees would be allowed, not 3 trees. And that was a point of controversy originally with when we first came before you, as to how many trees would be allowed.
I don't think that's accurate. I think
No,
he
we
said
said
3
3.
trees could be allowed.
3. I don't know where the controversy is. It was clear, 3 trees.
And what, I don't know if I need to submit this, because I don't know if anybody's seen this email. This email indicates from the DPW, or the director, is that with the limited space, you may be able to plant a tree depending on the species. So there's 18, only 2 trees were going to be allowed.
No, he's referring to the 3rd tree, that it would need to be of an appropriate species for the limited space for the 3rd tree.
Which was
2
over
trees are
by-
no problem. The 3rd tree, if it's the right species. I've read the email.
Mr. Elliott can say that, but I'm gonna continue. From Mr. Elvis wrote, Doug, the city's called the owner back in front of the Planning Commission on April 24th to explain why he hasn't completed a site plan. Can you and Matt look at the PROW and determine how many trees will fit? 2 or 3. This is an email from Mr. Elvis. Locate where you would allow them and mark with a marking paint. I have attached a picture of his site plan showing 3 trees. He was told that only 2 trees will fit on the site. So it's clearly indicating 2 or 3. That issue hasn't necessarily been resolved yet. Okay? And additionally, at $325, that's no way related to $10,000 for a bond.
Okay, so let's stop at a point for a second.
Well, can I go back? Hold on a second. I just want to say this first. We had the meeting on November 28th to do the TCO. Correct me if I'm wrong. did we do the TCO on November 28th before or after Fantastic Sands was in the building?
Well, there was, I guess I should point out too, that there was a development agreement for this property on November 15th,
Okay.
prior to the TCO
Okay.
being issued. The development agreement calls for a process for my client to go through, which included getting a variance for the sign and going through site plan approval. Site plan approval took place on January 9th at that time. The exhibit, the last exhibit, which is the development agreement, does not call for a bond.
So let me ask you this.
Excuse
When
me,
did the-
excuse me, Glenn. Point of order on this. Let's refer to what we passed on January 23rd, which this commission resolved and passed, in that the Planning Commission approve a new TCO for 246 West 14 Mile Road, which was Fantastic Sam's, subject to completion of site work for the site plan approved on January 9th, 2018, which includes reconstruction of the pole sign and planting of trees in the front of the property, and that the TCO will be approved no longer than May 31st, 2018, with a $10,000 cash deposit or bond that is satisfactory to the city, and this is your Exhibit C on that.
Yes, and I'd be happy to respond. Bottom line, it was not a new TCO. The TCO was still valid. Every email that we have, we've indicated, I've included an email, which is Exhibit E, and everything from Mr. Elliott is indicated that was an extension of an existing TCO, not a new TCO. That was an
So-
extension of an existing TCO.
So when
not
was
new.
that? When was that
Just to
orig-
clarify that point, so
Yeah.
we did just have our dates straight. November 28th, you authorized 60 days for a TCO. That was up January 28th. In advance of January 28th, you met on the 23rd, anticipating it expiring. We had discussed this on January 9th, you'll find in the minutes.
Yep.
And when we came back January 23rd, they were not here. You wanted to make sure there was a path forward for Fantastic Sam's to get a new TCO, because theirs was going to expire in 5 days. And you took the action that Commissioner McHale
Which,
just read.
if we had, in my opinion, if we had the evidence as far as how much it was going to cost, we would have had to come up with the estimates, right? But we were using a previous example, and we have used the monument signs that are going around town as far as what the estimated cost was. And that was our basis as far as the dollar value we came up with. And we also said that if that was not correct, that you were to come back to us as far as what that amount was. And this is the first time we're coming and hearing that, oh, it's less than $10,000.
Can I, if I may, I need to point out something that Mr. Elliott stated. He stated that we were not present at the January 23rd meeting. There's a reason for that. Only 5 days prior to that hearing were we informed that you guys were going to be asking for the bond at that hearing. We actually, on January 18th, prior to January 23rd, that's when Mr. Elliott informed us that it was coming before this commission on the TCO. The next day, my client informed Mr. Elliott we would not be present. This should have, two things. This should have been addressed on January 9th, or it should have been adjourned so we could have an opportunity to discuss this matter. We had no opportunity to discuss this because it still proceeded. We only had 5 days' notice. When I'm in court, 7 days' notice on a motion is always required. 5 days gives us no time. It gives us absolutely no time. It should have been adjourned.
Actually, it does. It gives you 5 days. And we're not a court.
I understand.
Wait, let me finish what I'm saying, please. We're not a court. And secondly, we meet once every 2 weeks. And so should we have let the TCO expire? Would you be fine with that? And then just put a closed sign on Fantastic Sam's while we resolved at that time? Would that have been a better solution for you?
I'm not saying that would or wouldn't have been a better solution.
Well,
but
we meet on the 23rd.
Sure.
You were given 5 days. In no world does 5 days mean you have no time. It means you have 5 days.
But my client indicated, Mr. Elliott, we would not be present. We had no opportunity to have that hearing.
Okay.
There's an email. We've indicated that as an exhibit, that we would not be present.
What exhibit is that, please?
Sure.
The exhibit says that Mr. Band would be unable to attend because he would
Exhibit E.
be out of state. Only Mr. Band.
C or B? I'm
Exhibit
sorry.
E.
E.
Yeah.
Got it.
Mr. Band at that time had a lawyer, his son. His son was involved in this when we did the development agreement. His son could have written at length an email responding on reasons why it would be inappropriate to take any action at that time, or he could have appeared, but he didn't. A simple email, I'm out of town at that time, doesn't mean a single darn thing. It's just he's not, Mr. Band Sr. isn't going to be available. His son's available. He was representing him.
And I was not made a party to any communications on that matter.
But
Well,
That's not our
that
concern,
means
though.
he doesn't have communication with his father about things going on affecting the matters in
Mr.
which he
King answered
represents
one of
them.
my questions. I just, it sounded like there was some representation. I'm curious also about Exhibit D, which is the building permit documentation, specifically the second page of it, because what we don't have in front of us, beyond what looks like well, help me understand, when was this work, the estimates completed? There is nothing to suggest when this was completed. Was this completed after we had the conversation? In between this gap of the January meetings and February 5th is the only date that I see on this particular document.
Well,
And I would really like to understand that piece of the puzzle.
Sure. Well, I will indicate on the January 19th response to Mr. Elliott's email, Mr. Band, Senior, one of the members of Clawson Corners, does indicate that drawings and price have not been done yet. Okay? That was an indication to Mr. Elliott prior to the January 23rd meeting. Whether that was made known to this commission, I have no idea. I wasn't at that meeting. But we indicated that drawings and price had not been done yet. So $10,000 out of the air is an arbitrary number.
Excuse me, on this, your Exhibit D, though, the only thing that's included in that is the remove existing sign and add new box double-side faces. Doesn't mention anything about trees or anything else on this.
Sure. Well, the issue.
That would be additional costings.
Yeah, but the issue of trees had not been resolved yet. And we literally just got this email on April 19th indicating how much the amount of the trees would be. $325 installed. We just got this information. We didn't have this information
Okay,
prior
well,
to.
this is the only information we have.
So let me ask this, if for a point of possibly resolving this, so you're telling us right now you've got about $3,800, $3,850 in work to do on the sign, correct?
Well, I'm going to mention that work, if my
I
client.
think if he steps up to the microphone and introduce himself, right, he
Sure.
can speak.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
my client can make some comments.
I'll say my name's Stephen Band. I'm one of the members of Clawson Corners LLC. And the first comment I want to make, when this meeting came, that we had the 5-day notice, Mr. Elliott knew that we weren't going to be there and said we didn't need to be present and we were going to be adjourned. So I don't care what he says, that was the case, or we would
Do you
have
have
some
that in writing? Do you have some
representation. of it.
verification? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I apologize. Do you have that in writing, that Mr.
No,
Elliott stated that
we
to you?
do not.
Well,
It
no,
was a
we have-
verbal.
The email was in.
The email said we're not going to be there, and he says, fine, it's there, we're not going to be, it's going to be waited till I get back. So that's number one. Number two, when we were before this commission, here was the time frame involved. Number one, we'll discuss the trees. Can I hold this?
Absolutely.
And when Susie stepped up, we talked about the trees, and it was a question. We came up with potentially 3 trees in the front of the property, one on both sides and one by what's the bus stop. The email came there's 18 feet, it may be a different species, whatever the case is. One of those trees is a responsibility of the city that was removed when they did the sewer construction. That wasn't put back in. The city agreed to do that. Susie got up and said, we have federal money, and the federal money will take care of the placement of the trees. Now, I got involved with my landscaper on this thing because Mr. Elliott sent me what Charlie Lawrence L. did at the 2 shopping centers down the way. And I have a letter here somewhere from my landscaper. Number one, the right-of-way, and the question came, who puts them in? We don't own that property. That is a right-of-way owned by the city. These are deep-rooted trees. Eventually, there will be a problem. From my landscaper, does 18 of my shopping centers. Checked with his insurance company. He cannot plant a deep-rooted tree on property we don't own. All the other cities, if there's one, if it's Birmingham, whatever, they put them in They maintain them. We have a sprinkler system there. There's watering. This email just came, which was forwarded us by John Kinsept. And this deals with one tree on one side, possibly on the other. The question is why the one hasn't been in there, the other two. I'll pay for the $325. I don't care. I just want this done with. It's a waste of time. But that's got to be it. Now, regarding the pole, the sign, this is a simple box. Nothing was ever mentioned, anything until after the fact about a bond. We made a commitment in front of this commission when we talked about the sign. Depending upon weather, it would be in by May 31st. Now, I've been all over my sign guy. This weather has stopped everything, unfortunately. We live in Michigan. It's been rainy, it's been cold, they were out there. The box is under construction. It will be in by May 31st. We're hoping that it's May 15th. And I have a picture as of yesterday morning of the construction of the box, which I'm happy to share. So I got two things, one from my landscaper, another one an update and a picture of the sign.
And if I may, according to Mr. Elliott's letter, which was received today at 5:05, 2 hours before this hearing, he indicated that we haven't performed any of the work necessary to complete the required site improvements. That's just not true. We've been already out there. This picture indicates how much work we've already done on the
Can you
sign.
pass that picture around, please?
Sure.
John, again, I'll go to you when he's talking about the tree situation.
Where's this picture taken?
And he can't take,
It's taken by the.
No, not by whom. Where is it?
That's manufacturing the sign.
Is this the existing sign just with this?
No, that's the new sign, because what we're doing is
It's not on site. Is it?
We have a
What
picture
we're
up on the
doing on
screen of the
this,
sign
the-
as it
it's-
currently is up on the screen.
the existing poles are being used. If the existing poles weren't there, it's a different situation. So that box is gonna come out, the poles are cut shorter, and that gets inserted on it. There's a difference if you had to do the poles and everything. We indicated that we were using the existing, just shortening to the agreed-upon mount that was worked on to get to that.
Right. You're saying it's held up because of weather?
Well, it's under construction. It got held up because this wonderful Michigan weather, which is cold, wet. They can't do outside work. It's dangerous to do it. They were out there last week. They had 3 people out there, 3 different days, did their field measurements, what had to be done, and that is, so far, as of Monday morning. And it's proceeding. So the game plan is, I'm shooting for May 15th. It'll definitely be by the end of May, which we represented to this council at the hearing on the time frame. If we didn't live in Michigan, we lived in Florida, it would have been done a long time ago.
No, you might need a better contractor because Zorba's sign was removed, lowered down, re-signed within a 3-day period, and they just did that last month or so.
Is he using the same box, or was that a new
Yeah,
box?
they used the same
it's the
box,
same
they
thing.
chopped it down, they lowered it down, they replaced the signage.
Well, this is
So
up in the
it can-
air a little
so
bit, where that is on the ground.
so
There's
it-
No,
makes a difference.
Zorba's was up in the air.
It can be done, and we've been talking about this for quite a long time. And
Yeah,
that's the reason we're asking for a bond, because we want to see some action done on this. We want to see something taken care, moving along. And if it doesn't move along, that's what we want the bond money for. Then we will do it, and we will take the bond money in order to cover
He
that.
also ran 6 days of no power because of where he's located, but there were power outages, but that's a different situation.
Okay, but-
But right now, it's moving along very fast, it's expected to be done. The tree situation, again, the city's got to do it. If it's a matter of, I've got a checkbook here, I'll write you a couple, the 325, we're done. But nowhere in this development agreement or any time prior to this meeting that we weren't at was a bond ever mentioned. We're just proceeding. We've been in the city for 38 years. This is not a working relationship that I expect because we're proceeding and doing.
So, you gave us this, and again, I don't know what this is, but you're telling us it's your completed, your sign that's in the process of being built. I understand that. We have no proof of that, but you did give us that. You're telling us that Mr. Elliott told you something. You have no proof of it. It's just your word. This is your word. Again, we're saying to you, whether there's been previous knowledge of it before, and again, I don't know the law of it, and so if John is telling me I'm wrong, I'll stand corrected when he tells me that. But you have work of $3,850 here. We want a bond on top of that. Are you willing to do that, yes or no?
What is the bond on top
So,
of that?
a bond for that amount, what are we be looking at?
I
Are we
don't
looking
think we're
at
ready to
10?
talk about that yet.
Yeah,
Let's
we're-
figure out as far as what it all encompasses, right? Because I still don't even think we got our timeline straight.
And an issue of, today is April 24th. He's hoping by May 15th, it's going to be up and in.
So you'd have your bond back at that time then? So if it's up and in at that
Let me
time?
ask a question. When you give somebody a bond, and I talked to John Kinsept about this, here's a check, by the way. There's some type of an agreement. You don't have any kind of an agreement that says, I'm giving you a check and what it is and what we're getting it back for.
Now,
When-
I'll expand upon that conversation. May I take the?
No.
Thanks, you can take your stuff. I'm going to depart a little bit by pointing out that this is really a very simple issue. We did the development agreement, which was signed in November, and it was negotiated, the terms were negotiated, and they were essential in that document for several purposes. And you could not at that time say anything about a TCO because you didn't even know whether that was going to arise.
Right.
Because you didn't have a clear idea what the hell was going to happen.
They were still looking for a variance on the sign.
What was going to happen? And of course, in your own ordinance, you have requirements as far as the posting of security in connection with the TCO when it's issued. So anyway, Exhibit D of that document, signed in November, negotiated with Mr. Band and his attorney. Paragraph 6 talks about the fact that the owners understand a TCO certificate must be approved by the Planning Commission. City will take all measures necessary to persuade that body. The circumstances of this situation only dictate the need for the issuance of the temporary certificate of occupancy. Any deviation by the owners from the requirements of this development agreement or any unexplained deferral of the requirements hereunder agreed to by the owners shall authorize the city to take such action as is necessary and expedient to implement the intentions of this agreement and fulfill the conditions imposed by the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Planning Commission. All right, now, January, the minutes of January. And I'm going to quote this for the record.
What exhibit?
It's your exhibit,
Which
January 9th, ma'am.
January 9th. Yep. So I apologize for going online. Mr. Ban asked how long site plans are good for, and if the TCO for Fantastic Sam's can be permanent. Mr. Elliott responded that site plans do not expire, often provided nothing changes. He also explained that the certificate of occupancy can be issued if the site work is completed or if they submit security deposit for incomplete items. Mr. Elliott explained that the items that can be discussed at the future Planning Commission meeting. So again, at that point in time, there wasn't any clarification upon which an amount could be determined. And as I told you before, you have to have a reasonable relationship on the amount of the bond in connection with the cost of what's going to be done. But everything was even up in the air in January. So how could you make a determination? Board member Shepherd asked whose responsibility is it for the 3 trees. Mr. Elliott responded that it is the applicant's responsibility for the 3 street trees, whether or not he negotiates with the city to replace that tree that was removed. Now, I'm going to depart from the minutes. That's sort of significant. Let's see now. They could have had a conversation with the city manager to figure out the tree situation. But that never came about, of course. They just complained that their landscaper wouldn't put in the tree. But no one made an effort on their side to reach out to the city, as was suggested, to talk with the city manager or Mr. Albus about what can be done in that situation. Continuing with the minutes, Board member McHale asked how the site plan approval affects the TCO for Fantastic Sam's. Mr. Elliott replied that the CO will remain temporary and until the site improvements are complete. Mr. Casera reiterated that the TCO will remain in effect or can be extended until the site plan improvements are completed. So then the 23rd comes along, and all you get is an email, and that's their Exhibit E, and it says from Mr. Ban Senior, I will be out of town at that time. Now, there's no intention to make a request of the hearing. There's no intention to submit a proposal that might be considered. There's no consideration that his son should appear at that meeting and argue on his behalf. So you're sort of left in the air. So the 23rd comes along. You've been horsing around with this since November, and I am going to assume there's a certain amount of frustration on why it is taking so long in this very simple matter to get clarity, certainty, and an agreement. So if you made a determination for $10,000, okay, you did it, and I'm going to assume, because you're my client, you did it fair, reasonably, and with sufficient justification, and not condemnation. And I've never heard that you are unwavering in that amount. You haven't heard from them at all right now what the total cost is they're willing to put up as security. Now, the comment is made that if we post a bond, there's no agreement. I have repeatedly told them it's hard to create a document in advance when you don't have the positives on what's to be done and the figures on what's going to be in it. But I did tell them you can do a cash bond with the city, and we always do that, very simple. Money goes into the city, it's paid back to you when everything's done. Period. Simple. One page. You can get a security. You can get a surety. You can get a performance bond. I gave the alternatives. I'm not going to make up what they should do. That's not my obligation. That is a sophisticated developer. You heard him talk about his 16 shopping centers. So he knows what the game is, and he knows what to do, and we're being horsed around. That's a Kingsept phrase, legal. Horsed around. And that's what's happening here. So it's very simple. The question to them right now, what are you willing to do? How much are you willing to put up? And when will you put it up?
May I reply? Again, the response that we have is a building permit approved by the building director at $3,850, which was approved 12 days later after you guys made the determination of $10,000. I don't know if everybody heard that.
I see what you're doing. You're disputing $3,000, or like, let's say $4,000 compared to the $10,000 that we asked for.
Yes,
There's
I
a
mean-
dollar dispute there.
I
Are you willing to put up like the $4,000 or three and change, whatever it is?
I'd be more than happy to discuss that with my client, but literally the first notice, the first opportunity we've had to
We
even
would be more
discuss
than
that
happy to
amount.
consider extending your TCO at the same time.
Right, but I'm saying the first hearing, this is the first time that we've had a meaningful opportunity to discuss a bond. It's the first time a meaningful opportunity, okay? $3,850 is the amount of construction, plus $325 for the trees pursuant to the email, but there's a big difference between $4,000 and $10,000. It seems a very
Okay.
arbitrary number.
So, guys, people on our board, if we, go ahead, John.
Representing the city, you're not going to negotiate on the record. If they're willing to come up with something, we can take a recess right now. The two of them can confab, come back with an agreement and specifics and present it to you. But we're not going to negotiate this publicly.
So the other thing is, what was our timetable? We had the expiration is on,
It expired January 28th.
no, I know, but I said, as far as what we had agreed to back on January 28th.
We gave them 60
Oh, we
days.
gave them till May 31st, like we do
31st.
everyone,
So now, everything has to be done by May 31st, right?
unless you change that.
Unless we change it.
May 31st is the drop dead. on your-
If I may ask, I mean, one of the things I think before we have a meaningful opportunity to discuss this is what happens with the trees. Is the city putting in the trees? How many trees? The price of the trees? I think that goes into.
City's going to
not up to
pay for
us.
one tree.
That's not up
Their
to us.
responsibility is to put in 3 trees.
Even though our
Who's that?
contractor said he won't do it pursuant to his insurance.
Well, it's funny, everybody else can do it.
We need to, could you find another, possibly another landscaper?
Can we find another landscaper?
Yeah, I mean, why is it we've had other businesses that have put the same trees in the same easement area? You're telling us you have a landscaper that won't do it. So possibly, could you find another landscaper?
It's very simple. Who owns that property?
It's not, the city will give them
that
a
simple.
permit to do it.
Well, the city-
Alternatively, the city may do it,
Who owns?
but they're going to pay for it. because it's their responsibility.
Paying for it is
So
one thing.
what we're
I don't
talking
have a
about,
problem.
if
Installing
I
it,
could
I'm-
finish, Steve.
Time, please.
What we're talking about tonight is the amount of security that's required because it is undisputed that there aren't any trees out there now. So we need 3. City's going to pay for 1. They're going to therefore pay for 2. So there needs to be security for 2 installed trees of the nature that are shown on the site plan.
And that is at $325 per the email installed?
That's the city's cost.
The
Last
city-
year.
I'm asking the question.
I don't know. You can present to the planning commission what you believe.
Again, we got-
Everybody else presents estimates of the value of the work to be done.
Well,
If
as
you
far as,
have an estimate, you can submit that to the planning commission. They will evaluate it and coming up with your
It's going to
total.
be very hard for us to
security
come up
amount.
with how much of a bond we're going to request from you if we don't know what it's going to cost. You know what your sign's going to cost, obviously, but you don't know what the trees are going to
well,
cost.
again, we
That's-
only
that's-
have,
That's not our job to do. That's not our homework.
absolutely, but we do have this email indicating the statement that it was $325 for 2.5 caliper trees that was purchased last year and installed. So that is the only, and that was sent on April 19th, so that's what we can go off of at this time. Because I don't think that issue has been completely resolved. And
Okay.
this is what we can base our estimate on, based on a statement by someone within the city or the director, $325. And I don't think there's any objection on the $325 giving a bond for that. I don't think there's any issue on that.
You have no
I
problem with that.
assume the
Okay.
city didn't buy just 2 trees when they got a price of $325 a tree, I will
No.
point out. So it's fair for you to assume that 2 trees might cost more than 200 trees, but, you know.
But-
We don't have any estimates presented by the applicant in front of us tonight.
But I hope you're not suggesting that 2 trees is going to cost $6,000.
I'm suggesting that you should submit evidence of what you think the cost of your obligations are to the planning commission and let them decide.
Quite honestly, as
is
far as
their-
this is meaningless. I don't know if this guy's an
Responsibility.
arborist. I'm looking at his qualifications that he puts on his letterhead: liquid and granular fertilizer, insect disease control, core aerations, perimeter pest control, and grub control. I don't see anything about actual landscaping or whether he has an arborist license. So, I mean, this is
I don't have
meaningless
that
to me.
information.
I mean, all it tells me is this is no, and that's not acceptable.
I know this conversation came up among here, and the question is, it's a very simple concept. We don't own the land. At least I don't think we do. It's the right-of-way. There was a tree on there they took down. They're gonna put a tree back up, no question about that. Can you plant something on somebody else's property that you don't own?
Yes.
And that is the question. It's
Well, I
not
think we-
The
yes.
answer is yes, we've established
what is
that.
the
This
answer?
Because
happens
what
all the time.
happens,
Yes.
eventually, there will be a problem. It may be in 40 years, it may be in 10 years, it may be calling Roto-Rooter. Because from what I understand, all the utilities run along that right of way.
With all due
But
respect,
you asked
we
a question.
discussed this back in
You asked a
November.
question, and you were given an answer, and then as soon as you're given the answer, you say, nope, that's not the right answer. You
Well,
asked the
let-
question and.
I am prepared to get this thing done. I'm prepared to give you $325 a tree, 2 trees. I'm prepared to give you the bond and the amount of the permit. It will be done, but I need the responsibility of installing those by the city. I talked to 2 other landscapers, and they're scared to put them in the city. Now, whether you have somebody that may do it, that'll install it on their property, a bush is one thing. A deep-rooted tree is a different ballgame.
But you know perfectly well that we can't give you the authorization to say that we're going to get some planning. You know perfectly well. We cannot give that to you. You're standing here asking us for something you know we can't give you. So why would you do that? I don't
Because
understand.
Susie Steck even said we had it, and the conversation came up, I think even with Mr. Cosera, there was a question that came. You don't own the property. How do you do something that's not your property?
You get a
That's
permit
the
from the
question.
DPW, but that is not the question before the planning commission tonight.
Well, the question is a bond.
Are
and
you
the bond
done?
has to do with the amount of the
And
trees.
have you posted the security? And if you haven't, then how much is that security going to be? They established an amount, $10,000. If you want to be heard to argue that it should be less tonight, give them some evidence upon which to conclude that it should be less,
and-
and that's within their purview to determine how much it should be.
And we've attached as an exhibit the amount of the construction permit. Again, we've made the argument that this was an extension of an already existing TCO, not a new TCO. It should have been done upon the issuance of the original TCO. That's what your law requires.
All right,
That's
so
our
let's
argument.
back up to that as well.
That's a past piece of history.
Right.
That's a done deal.
Well,
I understand. 10,000 is the issue.
Unfortunately, I kind of tend to agree with you that we should have done that right up front. I was a little disappointed when I read the development agreement that nothing was written into that. But it's because we didn't have enough facts in front of us
nothing
to
at that
put
point in time.
that
Well,
in there.
Chairperson Casera, remember why that was? Because there wasn't an approved site plan yet. We had this discussion in November. We couldn't set an amount because we didn't have a site plan. Only when we have an approved site plan do we know what the site improvements are that they have to install that need to be guaranteed. So the city did them a favor in allowing Fantastic Sam's in pursuant to that development agreement 2 months ahead of when they should have been. And they want to now be heard to argue, well, okay, now you screwed up by doing us that favor, so now you can never have the security that clearly was contemplated by the agreement in the first place, by the discussion of the TCO in paragraphs 4 and 6 of that agreement.
Exhibit B, we were here. This is the minutes from the date we were here. There were six conditions subject to site plan approval. Bond was not made one of them. This keeps getting pushed down the road. Well, now we want a bond. What about all the other things that we were
But now
present for?
excuse me, now we do want a bond. So what you've been asked repeatedly tonight is, you come to us and tell us what the parameters are that you want that bond for, and we will let you know if you're going to get it. You can argue all night long, but that is what we're asking you right now. You give us the parameters of what you want in that, and then we'll determine if that meets our standards and if we agree or not. So are you ready to give those, or did you want more time to do that?
I think I would like an opportunity to at least talk with my client. Do you plan to get this done tonight? Yeah. We think we want to get it done tonight. If we can have an opportunity to recess this and have a meaningful discussion.
Take a 5-minute break?
5 minutes.
Done. 5-minute break. Maybe Mr. Elbis could discuss about future projects or something to kill some time? Kind of Phil?
I can discuss we had a cleanup of the Blue Moon Bar and Grill site last Friday. There is a real estate sign out front. While I was on site, a potential purchaser was on site looking at the property. I had a pleasant discussion with him, the real estate agent, and then the owner of the property was actually on the site also later, and while we were working on the site. So I don't know if you guys have noticed it cleaned up. It's kind of hard because you got construction barrels out front. And I made it clear that the construction will be cleared by July 1st. And also have a scheduled cleanup crew for the Atomic Chicken site. And
Yeah, they've had some trash stacked up out back there for a couple months now.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, and we're going to take those climbing vines off of the power lines in the back corner too.
Okay.
They had some cable TV line mixed in with it, but it's low voltage, so hopefully if the guy hits it with the chainsaw, it'll just snap it.
Yeah.
Susie, do you want to talk about the developments, or we don't have anything solid? I think there was a lot of discussion this week, or the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, we haven't, nothing concrete just yet, but we have, we talked to a gentleman that owns the former 24G building and Great Sport Coffee. So, I mean, he's been kind of going back and forth on his overall concepts and exactly what he wants to do, but it looks like he will be moving forward with demolishing the former Great Sport Coffee building and building another 2-story building to adjoin to the 24.
Oh, how exciting.
One story with extremely tall ceilings. So I would anticipate we're going to have some plans probably in the next month or two for that particular
Did
project.
I hear that Noble Fish is expanding?
Because I just heard that too, like literally just now.
Maybe I didn't.
I heard something, but not that.
Nothing in the news.
Yeah. So is there, with the change of seasons, is there any temporary locations going up that we need to be aware of, or?
We have not gotten any, the zoning board of appeals typically handles the temporary uses, like the
Okay.
fireworks and the flowers.
Yeah,
That guy is
exactly,
not,
right.
the guy that did the flowers and the fireworks last year has not come back to us yet. So I would imagine he probably would have wanted to have all that done last month. So, so far,
And I
nothing.
saw that there's some type of outdoor or outside construction going on of where Blockbuster was. Is that something that's happening, or?
I will have to drive by
Up at
tomorrow.
the center?
Yeah.
Isn't that where the Billings is moving into?
At Blockbuster?
That's what I thought you
Well-
said at the Clawson Shopping
The old
Center.
Ace.
The old
Like,
Ace.
They're at the
which
old
is next
Ace.
door. Yeah. It's-
Is
So I
that-
guess I was
that still
thinking
moving forward? Are we still?
Yes, as far as I know, this is still moving forward. I haven't heard otherwise.
It
How's
is
that?
up there.
So,
Yeah, I saw something. I just happened to, head over to, I don't remember what store I was going to. Oh, I remember Play It Again Sports. But,
see, and I was getting
saw
confused,
that.
Blockbuster, and I was thinking Movie Mania at the same
Yeah,
time.
no,
So I
no,
was
no,
thinking
no.
Rochester. So sorry. Yeah, as far as I know, they're still doing what they're gonna do over there for Billings.
Okay, all right.
So
Did we go anywhere with the Church of Clawson?
I have been exchanging emails with him. It looks like we're gonna try and set something up next week. So stay tuned on that particular. And we did there is a ribbon cutting this Saturday at Detroit Sports Collectibles, 661 South Main. It's where former Dance Nation, right next to Perry's. They are having their ribbon cutting this Saturday at noon. So if you can attend, please. Check 'em out.
KFC, looks like they're doing some outside work too.
That project is back on. So there was, the original contractor had canceled the permits, and Jim and I have been working with
Where are we
the
talking
owner.
about now?
KFC,
KFC.
1345 North Main. So Jim and I have been working with the owner and getting everything straight with the sign and the renovations. So they should be starting here in the next little bit.
Okay, are we back together here?
Quick one for Susie.
You gotta call
I've got
us
a quick
back
one
in.
for Susie. On the date, what's the date and time for that 661 South Main?
It is April 28th at 12 noon.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
More comments, Mr. Mann?
Jim said you need to call it again, Greg.
Call the hearing back in
After,
session.
I'll call the hearing back, or the meeting back in for the show cause hearing.
Michael Banda on behalf of Clawson Corners, an opportunity to discuss this matter with my client. One of the things that we would like to propose at this time is a reassessment or a reevaluation of the amount of the bond. We would like to request, we would be willing to post a bond in the amount of $3,850, which would cover the cost of the sign, the construction. And we would also add that we would do $325 for 2 trees, which is another total of $650. I think that brings the total to $4,500 in bond. We would request that that the city can keep the $650 allocated towards trees, and when they install 1 tree, they can use that money at that time and install the other 2 trees. So we wouldn't be asking for that money back. But we would also need some kind of timeline. We don't want to be back in front of you again on the 3850 with respect to doing the sign. We would need some kind of some notice on when this needs to be done by, when we can get our 3850 back. That's what we request. We don't want that sitting in limbo, not having any idea of when to get it back.
Can you get the sign down by May 31st? That's when your temporary CFO is going to expire.
That is the intention.
That's,
Well,
Unless there's some weather delay.
Well, if it's not down before May 31st, you're going to be back in front of us again, unfortunately.
It's supposed to be, we're shooting for May 15th, possibly May 31st on the onset. So we're trying to do it sooner than
Right,
later.
that-
Had this weather cooperated, this would have been done already.
Right.
But unfortunately,
But we don't want to be in front of you back here on any more issues with respect to this. We would like to get this resolved today, but there were pending issues. And again, I think 3850, in light of what our estimates are on the sign, plus 325 per tree, I think is a fair and reasonable amount of bond to post at this point, in light of all the facts.
Just the one question I would have, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
And if they can't install the 2 trees, in addition to their 1 tree, we would just request $325 back as, depending on how many trees are actually installed.
You want to get paid for trees that are put in the ground.
Yes, we want money back for trees that aren't installed.
So the one question I have, and this isn't to you, this is, I guess, to the city, are we willing to accept that amount because what happens by chance if it's more? Are we then on the line for the rest of it because we made an agreement for that? Or how do we stand with saying, here's the price we're
Well,
gonna
you
give you?
essentially are, because you don't have a basis for increasing it further at this moment. I mean, they've given an offer with some justification behind it on what the amount should be. So I think you've got to, if you're willing to accept that amount, yes. But going up higher than that, I'd be cautious on that because what's your rationale for it?
Well, other than it was 2018 now, not
Well,
We're also-
I know that.
We're
But,
also prepared to write a check right now, so. if that makes it
I mean, if they're prepared to do that, payable to the city of Clawson, then what I can do is write out something tonight and then make a
So do we
copy of
have-
it, that we've received it, what it's specifically for, when it will be released to them, and anything else they may want. I mean, we can do that handwritten right now. I cannot assure you that either party will be able to read it. I will, but I don't know about
But
anyone else.
could we potentially hurt the city by getting the $650 for those 2 trees and then the city go, we can't plant 2 trees for that price? Is there a possibility that that could happen?
almost certain that it'll be more this year than it was last.
So what do we do?
Has to be as much as it costs.
I'd like to see what the estimate for trees are, quite honestly, because there's been a run on landscaping trees because of the development that's going on at 75. I don't know if anybody's gone up there, but there's over 2,000 trees that are going to put in. So there may be a scarcity, which should have happened back in January as far as, okay, can I secure 2 trees at least at that point in time so that the state doesn't take them all out?
Well, if you want, then, I mean, we can at least do the agreement in typed format and leave the amount blank.
But are we also amending the site plan, because we have 3 agreed to?
No, there's gonna be 3.
Okay.
It's gonna be 3.
What we're
True.
saying is the city will pay for
Yeah.
one of them.
Okay.
The city
Right.
manager has said he will pay for
Okay,
one of the
fair enough.
Right.
Okay,
So you're not amending it.
okay.
So we can do that and then just leave the amount blank pending Jim's determination on what the trees may cost.
Okay.
but I want to write a check right now and get it out of the way.
Well, there could be an amount of money,
Right.
and as much of it as is needed for 2 trees is kept by the city. And, you know,
But how
the
do
rest goes back.
Yeah, that seemed to make sense. So would that,
But that's also open-ended. What if a tree is $2,000?
That'll, you know, that's a shame. You should have planted them yourself, but, you know, those are the 2 options, right? If you're gonna rely on the city to do it, then the city's gonna do it. If you wanna do it, then you can do it.
Come, step to the mic, Mike.
And I took a look at the minutes, and the minutes are not 100% of everything that they wrote. They're snippets. But Susie got up and said, there's federal money and we have the trees. And she stood up when we did that. Now, I don't know what that is, but if they've given you a grant for trees because she volunteered it, I don't know the status.
so where, I guess I missed that
Does that
part.
apply
Where do we
here?
find that in our exhibits?
It's not in the minutes.
Well, Susie's right here, so we can just ask her.
Okay.
It is not a federal grant. It is a small state grant for tree planting services. We have 20 to 24 trees, I believe it's 24 trees, that we have identified locations for. And those locations and species have been submitted as part of our grant application to the state, and that is where they expect trees to be planted. We cannot just take trees from that program and put them elsewhere in the city. So, and that grant was awarded in October of last year, so well before Mr. Band even came to us in November.
So just quickly looking online, from '07, this is from how much should I pay for a 2-inch caliper tree installed? It's about $300 per tree installed. That was 11 years ago.
Where's the 325 on this email from last year that we just got on Friday?
Well, I'm just saying, as far as what it ends up being, it could be very, it could be very different than what it's said there. So I just wanted to put that out there.
You
There was
could,
an email that was forwarded.
I requested the DPW director to provide numbers so we
Okay.
could get a ballpark,
Okay,
yeah.
and that's the numbers he provided.
okay, fair enough.
You concerned that 3 1/4 is not enough? per
I
tree?
am very concerned that that's the case.
Well, what about that idea that John put forth, though? It says, here's this amount. If it exceeds this, then this portion of the bond will be kept. We'll keep the amount of what it costs to purchase and install those 2 trees.
Yeah, I was just pointing that out, that's probably going to happen.
Okay.
So, because as far as I've not been out to any landscape recently.
It's too early.
Well, not too early. I
Other
used,
than Costco.
well, they have trees in March at a lot of the places, but I have not had a chance to do that. So, but I don't know what the going rate is.
Well, let's change this around. What if I give you the bond for the 3850 right now? That'll take care of the sign. Let's figure out what the trees are and work as a team and get it done. If we need an additional bond, we'll do it. So at least the sign end is out of the way.
I feel like this was part of the conversation earlier, that this was,
I've been having conversations with John Kinsept. I've had it with Jim Elbus, Mr. Elliott. We haven't talked about some of this stuff to get things worked out to this point. It's not true that there's zero conversations. So I just want to put that on the record.
We've had quite a few people come before us in the last couple months who have all estimated how much their street trees were going to cost, and we've set a bond amount for all those folks. And those folks, some of them were planting their trees in the public right-of-way as well. So there's 2 ways to do it. They can take responsibility for it, and then it costs them what it costs them. Or we can do it, and it's going to come out of the amount of the bond. And if it's going to come out of the amount of the bond, then the bond ought to be big enough to make sure there's sufficient money for both the sign work and the trees. And I believe there is other site work that Mr. Albus can discuss in terms of the barrier-free.
If there's anything, let's discuss it right now, because the other thing on there which had to do with the stripes was done back in August. And to our knowledge, there's nothing
Striping
else.
handicap spots are not properly marking them.
Yes, they are.
Stripes-
If you go take a look, it's exactly where you had on that plan, and it was done.
Well, your plans show existing handicap parking spaces. The planning commission required properly, 2 properly configured and marked barrier-free parking spaces shall be provided. That includes signage for barrier-free parking because we live in Michigan, snow covers up striping. And the properly dimensioned parking spots have to be installed, so.
They've already been installed where the ramps are. If you go by, it may have been covered when
We
you're
have
there.
pictures of you spray painting the handicap parking spots. I'm telling you that's not proper marking of the handicap parking spots. I anticipate you either having to change the striping, but you also have to install 2 signs identifying it as handicap parking
The
spots.
signs, I understand. There's a picture on there. Can you tell me? Because we believe we've done it right. If you take a look on the board.
Well, the walkway has to be 5 feet wide. That does not appear to be 5 feet wide.
That was waived. You're talking about the front walkway? That was
There
waived.
is no waiving of a barrier-free requirement. That's why the planning commission said 2 properly configured and marked handicap parking spots.
The 5
There is
feet.
no waiving of those requirements.
Are you talking about the
So,
walkway in front of
You
the
might have to
stores?
restripe,
Talking about the
you might have to restripe the
Are you
the
talking about the
access,
ramp?
the hatched
The
area.
ramp.
The hatched area, if you cannot see that on that picture,
I'm sorry, I don't know what hatched is.
Zebra stripes.
You're talking about the one that goes across?
yes,
5 feet wide.
it has to be 5 feet wide.
So there may be a little bit of striping moving.
So you will have to redo the striping. You'll have to install the handicap parking signage.
Okay, this is the first time we've heard about that.
Well,
No, we
that's
Well, that's
in the
part of
January
what was
9th
required.
minutes, it specifically says it.
I have to make one more point on this. While the commission may have stated that on the record, literally the only time that we've seen the 6 conditions was when I pulled the meetings up. We never got any formal notice, anything written sent from this commission, do these items. We never got
You were
that.
here on January
Yeah,
9th.
I understand, but a written order is different
they
than something
took
oral.
that
I'm not supposed to
action.
remember all 6 items. You think I'm going to
All the
remember all 6
minutes
items?
are published online
So,
the very next
well,
meeting.
I'll remove the argument here, the signs and the additional striping, $150.
Thank you.
That's just a ballpark.
Is that it?
With the requirements of the planning commission, the sign, the barrier-free parking, and the trees are the only things that I see that we need to address with the bond.
So if you guys want to add another $125, $150 on top of it, I don't think we're going to be opposed to that,
Okay.
because we want to get this resolved.
Well, I was on the site today. I took a picture of your back area. You see a leaning telephone pole. You got high power lines, and your riser is bent towards that. The power lines are about 6 feet above your dumpster, 6 to 8 feet. And your dumpsters pull out of the dumpster enclosure because it's not safe for the garbage truck to get back there. It's a safety issue that I just wanted to bring to your attention. It has nothing to do with this bond. I just wanted you to be aware of it. So I don't know when that happened.
I don't,
Is the pole on their property, or that's the other side of the wall?
The pole is the DTE or whoever owns that pole.
Right,
So,
that's on the other side of our wall.
yeah, it's their easement, so it's their pole, so you wouldn't be able to touch that. But with your riser leaning over, I wanted you to be aware of it, because you don't want a garbage truck running into a high power line and causing a major problem with your site. Okay?
well noted. So again, I guess to repeat, we're $38.50 for the sign is what we're proposing, plus $325 for 2 trees, plus another $150 for striping, which comes out to $46.50. That's our estimate.
We keep missing the point, we're not agreeing to 325 a tree.
Okay, well, I know, what I'm saying is that was what we proposed, and that's what we're waiting on, something with respect to,
So
I guess, the
as far as
trees.
the cost will come out of the bond, once it's determined what that cost is. Is that what we're agreeing to?
Well-
Mr. Shepherd, you're a lot more experienced than I am on the trees.
No.
What is a guesstimate of what you think 2 of these trees may be?
Well, like I
I
said,
don't
as
know.
far as, if I go back to what that link just showed, $300,
325.
yeah, I'd say depending on the type of tree, right? If it's, that
It
may
will
be
be
on
a-
sale, be quite honest with you. So you're looking at about $400 to $500. So you could be much more than that if you're looking at like a Japanese maple, which is not what you're doing, right? So it's
We didn't
more that way.
generate the email, but it was
No, I
forwarded
understand.
by Mr. Kinsey.
Yeah,
So that's all I can rely on.
yeah. No, I'd say it's closer to $400, especially the type of tree.
So another
So if we say
$75 a tree.
$400 a tree.
Yeah.
If
So that's 800.
800, 150 or 125 for a couple handicap signs and striping.
So you're at 4,800, and then if you call it an even 5,
Well, but there's no reason.
and I don't want to get into negotiating. This is just numbers, right?
I'm trying to, look, the bottom line
It's
is.
a
we wanna get it
deposit.
done.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
out of it will
There's
come
so
2
much
trees.
time and effort spent. It's, all it took was a phone call to us. Nobody reached out to us. The only one I've been talking to for my son is Mr. Kinsept, who's been wonderful.
Oh, you need to use your microphone.
You'd
I'm
use the
sorry.
mic,
Yeah,
he
sorry.
can't get you on.
The only one we've been talking to, or my son has, is Mr. Kinsept working with. Nobody else has appeared. Nobody called our sign company. Nobody called anything else within the city. You made a comment why we didn't reach out. We did. And nobody in effect reached out to us. Nobody bothered to call the sign company or anything else's status or what's going on. So it's a two-way street. In the same respect, why isn't it done? Why wasn't that tree that was removed 2 years ago put in last year? I don't know.
So you're saying I didn't call you, Mr. Band?
No, who?
James Albus, when you said
No,
that
I
you were going
talked
to
to
have.
Mr. Elvis too, and we had a good working
So you-
relationship. We got it. I'm sorry, I wasn't
You're saying
going
we're
in.
not reaching
But-
out
no,
to you, and
but-
I have exact.
But the two of us have had a nice working relationship. Mr. Kinsept has talked to my son. We've gotten us to this point that we're at, and we're just trying to get it done.
Okay.
And that's what it boils down to. I mean, look, how many people we have, how many people here, how much wasted time. You know what, for 38 years we've been here. And Mr. Elvis has been here for 23, 24, 25.
23.
Anytime we've had an issue, we've always had a phone call from Mr. Elvis. We've always had a phone call from, I forgot her name, who's in charge of compliance. Forgot her name, who's been here forever. Anytime something's there, we do it. This has just been an adversarial thing, and got to get through this. Things have to be worked out. Things changed. It's a 4-day week. They brought in outside contractors, McKenna, whatever the case may be. I don't want to go after anybody, but you know, we've been working on this since May of last year. Little excessive, isn't it?
Yep.
Where's the working relationship? You've been on this board and on the city forever, longer than we have with the center. I never had this. I deal in many communities. I don't get it. The public shouldn't get it. It's a waste of effort. We have a lot more things we can do other than this. Call a little meeting, put the 5 people, like we did the development agreement. We sat, we got it worked out. None of this was mentioned during that agreement. What happened? We're 4 or 5 months later. We're in Michigan, the weather. There's something wrong with this picture. We'll give you the bond. I don't know about the tree. We don't own the land. You're installing the one. They can install the other 2. We'll get this thing done. If there's an issue of putting up 2 signs up there, big deal, with a pole. It was never mentioned until now. If it means taking the striping and moving it over so that cross hatches, again, I don't know the term is done, big deal. I can't do that till the weather gets warm, which is sometime May or June, because you have to have a consistent weather above 60 degrees. So,
And if you need the $400 as opposed to the $325, it's not going to change really anything. It's small potatoes. So we're happy to accommodate that at
We're
$400.
making some progress here. We're getting there. We're getting real close here. You want to make a motion?
That we extend the TCO based off of a bond of $4,800 that is in a form that's accepted by the city.
Can we, before you make the motion, can I also get some clarity with respect to the time period in which the sign needs to be completed so the city
Well,
doesn't?
that's what I asked earlier. Your temporary now expires on May 31st. If we held you to that same date, my thought is we have 2 more meetings between now and then, and I want to see that sign down before then. If not, you will be back in front of us.
But enough, is that sufficient time?
that's what the sign company told me. That's why I have a picture of the cabinet.
Yep.
I guess if there's some extenuating circumstances to why it can't be May 31st,
Come and
we'll
talk
make
to us.
that known. But if my client indicates that May 31st is the deadline for completing that sign before any of that bond money is touched, then we'll agree to that. And again, if there's any type of issue that comes up along the way, we will make every attempt to inform this board of that. So,
Can I make a statement? The only issue that may come up,
Like,
the only issue that may come up, the sign may be done, but it's the graphics that the 2 tenants want or 3 tenants want. That may be the only holdup. But the cabinet itself,
yeah,
I can't control artwork from a large company.
right.
And that's not a problem, right? That's just what's going to be on the sign.
Physically, the sign will be lowered down to our
We
specifications.
don't mind if the graphics aren't there.
Right.
So, we have May 31st is the completion date.
Yes.
With the signs, but the trees and the handicap are a different issue.
No. All the site work by May 31st. If there's some reason why you can't do that, unlike everybody else, you need to explain that to the planning commission now.
And what are the,
That's what I just
what are,
said.
what are the dates that we can inform this commission? Because I understand you only meet every 2 weeks. And if we run into
April
issues.
24th is the date you can inform
Oh,
them.
today is April
Yeah, I understand that.
While we're talking
Whether
about
there's
the-
some reason why you can't meet
While
May
we're-
31st.
Well, we're talking about the sign by May 31st. When is the city going to plant the tree?
The city will plant the trees when the city plants the trees if we have the money to plant the trees. That's not an issue. You have to finish the barrier-free striping and signs as well by May 31st.
Weather permitting, it will be done.
So I
May
hear
31st is the date that the planning commission has given to everyone to complete weather-related items of their site work. They've been very uniform in that.
If not,
So
we'll
you will
come-
have to come back here before then if there's some weather-related reason why those things can't be done.
That's agreed. If it's raining for 30 days, we can't do it. If it's below 60 degrees, you can't do it. I hope not.
So, and the reason why I'd still maintain May 31st for the trees, that if you don't have them in by that point in time, further you get into the summer, the less likely they'll be able to survive. So I'm sure the city is also aware of that.
We do have a sprinkler system on site, and there was something mentioned in this. We do have a sprinkler system, unless the city knocked it out when they did the sewers out there. But there was something mentioned in there from the city, from this email that we got on Friday, something about watering, and don't ask me what it is, because I don't know.
So it's a gator bag, as far as making sure that there's water retained around the tree so that it's adequately watered. But the problem is not necessarily whether or not it's watered, it's the actual stress of the temperature at that point in time. So it's something that you have to consider, that the cooler temperatures allow for a more opportune time in order to transplant a tree, especially at the size that we require.
Can I ask an additional question? On the east portion of the front, a bus stop was installed with a padded walkway, cement walkway. Smart, or whoever it is, put a garbage can in front of there.
I noticed that, yeah.
We didn't. On our wall, which is the gas station on the side, it is littered with cigarette butts and trash from people at the bus stop. They've also taken some marker, which we've cleaned off. When you install that tree, is there going to be issues with people at that bus stop? I can't tell you. I don't know. In the old days, people used to put a heart with their name and their girlfriends with an arrow through it. I don't know.
Yeah, that doesn't change anything. I mean, we can't predict human
we-
behavior,
we have
right?
ordinances
Other than,
on-
yeah, you're right.
We have ordinances on
But
graffiti, and
that's-
if the DPW is aware of it, they'll clean it up, or they'll make sure whoever owns it takes care of it. Are you making a motion and throwing a dollar figure on this thing?
Yeah, we did, $4,800.
And we're good with that?
May 31st?
Mm.
May 31st, yeah.
And the date. And anything else, more comments on it? Do I have a second on it?
I'll give you a second.
Okay, now I have a motion, I have a second. No more changes, no more comments. Roll call, please.
Mr. Casera,
Yes.
Mr. McHale,
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd,
Yes.
Mr. Watson,
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Motion carried.
I'll submit it tonight. John Kinstup's going to write up a quick agreement on his scribble.
Very good. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Well, do we want the record to show that it's done?
They'll handle that. Okay, now I'm going to open up public discussion, items not on the agenda. Anyone from the public that wishes to speak? Seeing none, I'm going to close public discussion, and we'll move on to other business.
I'll just let you know, the council's been having some discussion about various ordinances, a massage registration ordinance, the food truck ordinance that we've talked about from time to time, special events ordinance, and in connection with the massage registration ordinance, the question has come up, would that be potentially a home occupation? That ordinance doesn't regulate that, but council began looking at the current definition of a home occupation, which is kind of muddled, and has been working on some alternate language. So just to forewarn you, I guess, that that's going to come back here, because that'll start here then as an amendment to the zoning ordinance. So we have a meeting tomorrow to work on the language of those ordinances, and then at some point in the near future, we'll probably be looking at home occupations, how we want to define them, and maybe discussing more broadly the concepts of home occupations and home businesses, which are both terms that are used in the ordinance, typically distinguished by whether or not that sort of a activity would have employees associated with it. But the home businesses currently are in the downtown residential areas, and the home occupations are in the traditional residential areas. And it's probably how it will remain. The question that really comes up is, you know, is customer traffic to a home, to a business in a traditional home, something that the city wants to see? The current ordinance says that a home occupation should not increase traffic beyond what is normal for a residence, and so that's a little vague in terms of what that really means. Because basically any traffic is beyond what's normal for a residence. So, that'll be an issue that has to be considered as we work through that definition. But just to give you a heads up that that's coming in the
When
future.
you're reviewing those ordinances, do you bring them in front of us on planning to bounce it off us first, or you bounce it off council and then?
Council took up those ordinances on their own. We've come in kind of after they'd had some discussion about it. I guess 2 council meetings ago, they had a question for Mr. Albus about the massage ordinance, and that led to us, he and I, going to the council meeting last time and having some discussion with them, which has led to this meeting that's coming up. But they're not, those ordinances are not part of the land development regulations, and so they wouldn't necessarily come here. But the home occupation piece is, and so that will come here. In fact, it'll start here with public hearing here.
Okay.
Well, if I may comment on that, I mean, if I'm going to run a business out of my house, normally you're going to have a schedule anyway, just to keep any kind of traffic down to a minimum. Otherwise, 4th of July, we better get a parking deck. And for all the graduation parties, too.
Yeah, well, that exact point came up in the discussion. Well, what about graduation parties? But, that happens once a year, not regularly throughout the year, right?
Well, yeah, as far as the business goes, you're still going to run a schedule. I mean, you're not going to have 10 people show up at one time, so.
Well, we want to make sure that's true. That was all I wanted to bring to your attention.
Could have been a picture of anything.
So any complaints from any businesses as far as the construction?
We have waived the signage requirements in the construction areas, so you will see feather flags, A-frame signs. Lots of people are confused by the left turn. In fact, I was backed up for a light cycle because somebody was making a left turn when they shouldn't have been, and the police are heavily enforcing the area. So.
I hope they're also heavily enforcing Kenwood, but that's another story. So.
Yeah, that's another story. And I do recommend that every chance you guys get to go downtown to patron one of our places, do it. And because it's hard to get in there right now.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
I ate at Chutney's. I don't know if anybody else has. Excellent. So highly recommend it.
Has there anything else been brought up about those container apartments, anything, or did they?
No, I'm not optimistic that they are going to pursue that, at least at this point in time. I think that they are going to fix up the property and just use it as a rental home for now. And, I mean, they have said from the outset that they want to be a good neighbor. And so, and maintain that relationship, and their project could be a lot more viable, and they could address a lot of the issues, particularly as they relate to parking, if they have additional properties. So they're just gonna wait it out until it makes more sense for them to move forward with that project, though.
Okay.
That's all the good news I think we have, unless you have other
Ziolis, how are
questions.
they progressing?
They are moving forward. I mean, they're continuing to make strides. I think last week Joan said that they've got their windows cut out, and they are. Oh, what was the other things she said they were working on? It's moving along. There's probably later in the summer is my guess, late summer, early fall, but yeah, we're chugging
Can't
along.
wait. My kids have kept on bugging me for spaghetti this week, and we couldn't afford taking them over to do a venti. So.
Yeah, that might be a little bit out of the budget, I can imagine.
And Jim, I asked before, have you had any conversation with Traffic Digital Agency about their parking problem down there? Are they resolving that?
We have discussed it with them. It seems to be resolving itself here, and now that the weather's broke, more of their more of their employees are either carpooling or bicycling.
Use the bike rack, okay.
Now that you mentioned that, further down at CNC Bump Shop, that whole front of the property, is that going to be addressed as far as hazardous or?
Funny you kind of mentioned that. I had the pleasure of actually finally meeting face-to-face our DEQ, one of our DEQ contacts at a training a couple weeks ago, and I kind of relayed to him, and he and I have been exchanging emails like, hey, do you have any challenging sites? Yes?
I don't know what a DEQ, what was that?
Department of Environmental Quality.
Got it,
Sorry,
thanks, okay.
alphabet soup. So he and I have been communicating about some of our more challenged brownfield sites, and so we were chatting at this event, and it turns out my correspondence with him has now been forwarded to our actual point of contact for all projects that are in the works or maybe in the works or have been in the works, and they're not very happy with the current condition of the property. The property owner has not filed the required paperwork with the DEQ, including his baseline environmental assessment.
Susie, some of the planning commissioners might not be aware, the DEQ is involved because there was underground storage tanks on the site.
Yes, there's it's a
started to
leaking
remove-
underground storage
They started
tank.
to remove them, and then we put a stop on it. Now it's fenced off. So it's,
Well, we didn't really stop them. I think they did remove them.
no, it's in the ground.
I believe that there's actually two tanks that are at that site. I think the one out front, in the front yard, I think that was the one that was removed, but it's my understanding that I guess it would be the oil tank, is still actually inside.
There's a tank still there. I saw them. They cut a hole in the top of it, tried to drain it out, and they were going to pull it on a Sunday afternoon. That's when we put a stop to it. So now it's just kind of taped off for people for hazards. I guess it's pretty much an eyesore, but I don't know what else we can do with it.
Well, I have a feeling that now that the DEQ is a little bit more aware of exactly what has happened at that site, I think there's probably going to be a little bit more enforcement on their part. Definitely, more communication from them with us at the city, so we understand exactly how much trouble the property owner may or may not be in, what steps maybe we need to take, and just generally keeping us informed and knowing what's going on.
Yeah,
But
it looks like it could be pretty costly to work in that way, but it's an interesting building. I like the architecture of it. I think
well,
it could be saved.
because I do too. I think it's like the cutest bump shop in the city.
Yeah.
Cutest bump shop period that I've ever seen. But because so the baseline environmental assessment, tells you what level and exactly what contaminants are at the site prior to purchasing it. And that is a best practice when you are purchasing contaminated sites or properties that you think are contaminated. This property owner didn't do that, so he is actually now responsible for all of the contamination that is at that site. So the 50, 60 years before, he is now liable for all of it.
Wow.
So it'll be a pretty big. It's
So
a
are they
pretty
going to
big
go in and take a look
responsibility.
as far as what still exists there and whether or not, what the condition of those tanks are, whether they're compromised?
They are aware that there is a leaking underground storage tank there. My suggestion, and the DEQ has not given me any specific instructions on this, but I would say if you see work happening, shoot me a text.
Okay.
And I can get in contact with them. The email I received yesterday said that the DEQ can go out there when the property owner is doing work and help them to comply. So, I think that they're willing to work with us.
DEQ unfortunately has taken, their regulatory structure now is one where they rely on a lot of self-reporting, right? And so it's hard
So
for
they
you
can't
to.
go out to the owner's residence and say, what are you doing to that property? They have to be on
They
site.
are-
What was supposed to have happened was that he was supposed to have a qualified consultant there when he was doing the work. And then the consultant could look at the condition of the soil and do the appropriate tests and report all that to the DEQ. At the end of the day, what the DEQ's process anymore is to rely on a closure report that comes from a consultant. Right, and so now this is kind of an example of the failure of their current process, I would say, because now, they know what's happening. They got a report on the leaking. They got, I think, 2 leaking underground storage tank reports from a consultant before he bought the property, and so they listed them. And then he went in there. He didn't do his BEA. And he didn't file it with the DEQ, so he has no way of proving what was there before he bought it, and so he bought all of it, and now he's just mucked it up.
So how
But
far
they
did-
don't really have they may have a process for addressing that, but in this scope, I don't think that hits their radar, right? It's just stalled out now, and nothing can happen with the property until he proves via some legitimate consultant to the DEQ that he has cleaned it up. Because they know it's there, and they expect it to be cleaned up, but I don't
So
think
to
they're
what
really
extent
gonna
has
force
it leaked? Do we know the area?
That I do not know.
Not until they start pulling core samples out, they won't know.
And you've got Bayless to the south too, right? So he's
Correct.
probably thinking that, hey, whatever's under my ground, his problem.
Yep.
Bayless thinking, possibly. Bayless, I'm sure. They've already cleaned up they cleaned up their site years ago.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
and took care of their tanks. So, they are well aware of.
Okay.
I think I would imagine that they have a fairly solid handle on what contaminants may still be on their property, if any.
Okay. So as far as the condition of the building, though, how much could potentially be compromised by the state of the front of the property?
That's an excellent question. And he has repeatedly come to us saying, hey, I've got a tenant for this space. It'd be really, really cool. What do I need to do to gain occupancy? And the standard answer has been, we need to get a copy of all reports and communications approved plans approved plans from the DEQ, and we need a structural engineer to sign off certifying that the building is structurally sound because you have disturbed the ground. And don't forget about site plan review. And if you have some idea that is not in line with the permitted uses, then we'll have to have a different, more layered conversation.
See,
We've
my
not
con-
gotten any of that.
Yeah, because
so
my concern is at some point in time in the next year and a half, we might see the front of that thing come down.
Yeah, it's an awkward.
that would not surprise me.
And it may not, well, I'm not going to say any more than that, but it may not surprise me that that happens by somebody, and somebody else may be pleased by that happening.
Anything else?
Yeah, I have a question. This is going back now. We're trying to maintain some good, high standards. Is there a city plan, Jim, that you're aware of regarding our parking lots for improvements and quality?
Our public parking lots?
Yes,
In the downtown?
yes.
There's been multiple surveys of parking in the downtown, and there's records of it, so.
What about the resurfacing of some of our yards, parking lots? Is that on a city plan or you're aware of?
I'm not aware of the resurfacing schedule for our parking lots, no.
I concur with him.
And I concur with the way they look.
Okay, anybody like to adjourn?
I make a motion, we adjourn this meeting of the regularly scheduled planning commission for April 24th, 2018.
I'll support that.
Motion support, roll call, please.
Mr. Shep?
Yes.
Mr. McHale?
Oh, jeez.
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yes.
Mr. Watson?
Yes.
Mr. Jacobson?
Yes.
Mr. Katsara?
Yes. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.